They called her a monkey, said she belonged in a tree, not a classroom. 3 months later, those same people would be begging for what only she could give them, their lives. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe button and like this story. Thank you. Now let's continue. The apartment door slammed in Nikoyo's face before she could finish her sentence. Through the ornate wood, she heard Mrs. Patricia Whitmore's shrill voice. "Harold, Harold, come quick! That African woman is still here." Nikoyo stood frozen on the pristine doorstep of 447 Magnolia Drive, her worn suitcase beside her, acceptance letter from Lincoln Heights High School clutched in trembling fingers. The September sun beat down on her dark skin, and she could feel sweat forming beneath her traditional wrapper, that she'd worn hoping to make a good first impression. Wrong choice, apparently. The door cracked open again. This time, Harold Whitmore filled the frame. Tall, red-faced, his khaki pants and polo shirt screaming old money and older prejudices. "Listen here," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "This is a respectable neighborhood. We don't rent to your kind. Go back to whatever hut you came from." "Sir, I have first and last month's rent, plus deposit. I have a teaching position at—" "Did you hear me?" His voice rose. "We don't want you here. You people don't even have electricity where you're from, do you? Probably lived in a tree your whole life. Now get off my property before I call the police." Nikoyo's jaw tightened. She wanted to tell him about her master's degree in biochemistry from the University of Lagos, about the research she'd conducted on tropical disease vectors, about the 5 languages she spoke fluently. Instead, she picked up her suitcase. "Thank you for your time," she said quietly, and walked away with her head high, even as she heard Patricia Whitmore's cackling laughter behind her. That was rejection number 7 in 2 weeks. She'd come to America with such hope. The teaching position at Lincoln Heights High School had seemed like a miracle. A chance to share her knowledge, to bridge cultures, to make a difference. The salary would let her send money home to her family in Calabar, help her younger siblings finish school. Her mother had cried when Nikoyo left, pressing a small leather pouch into her hands. "Your grandmother's medicine bag," her mother had whispered, "for luck, and to remember who you are." The bag now hung around Nikoyo's neck, hidden beneath her blouse. She touched it through the fabric as she walked down Magnolia Drive, past the manicured lawns and the BMWs in the driveways, past the America she dreamed about, and into the one that actually existed. She eventually found a room in Mrs. Chen's boarding house on the south side of town, a tiny space with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanked all night. But Mrs. Chen looked at Nikoyo's references, not her skin, and shook her hand firmly. "First Monday of every month," she said, "and welcome to America, dear." Lincoln Heights High School was a sprawling brick building that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the window frames. The football field's grass had gone brown in patches. But to Nikoyo, walking through those doors on her first day, it represented possibility. Principal Hendricks was a tired-looking man, with kind eyes and coffee stains on his tie. "Look, Miss Oken," he said, mispronouncing her last name. It was Ocon, not Ocon, but she didn't correct him. "I'm going to be straight with you. You're our 4th biology teacher this year. The kids are rough, especially the seniors. Some of the parents have already called, concerned about your background. My qualifications are— I know. Your credentials are impeccable. That's why I hired you. But credentials don't mean much to these kids or their parents. You're going to have to prove yourself every single day. He had no idea how prophetic those words would be. Room 214 fell silent when Nikoyo entered. 27 pairs of eyes tracked her movement to the desk. She set down her bag and turned to face them, taking in the scene. Students slumped in chairs, one boy with his hood up, sleeping in the back, two girls texting under their desks, a cluster of football players sneering at her. "Good morning," she said, her Nigerian accent clear and strong. "My name is Miss Okan. I will be your biology teacher." Someone in the back made monkey noises. Laughter rippled through the room. Nikoyo's stomach clenched, but she kept her face neutral. "That's enough," she said firmly. "Where you from, miss?" called out Tyler Jenkins, the star quarterback. His friends snickered. "The jungle?" More laughter. Someone else made ape sounds. A paper airplane sailed past Nikoyo's head. "I am from Nigeria," she said calmly, walking to the world map on the wall. She pointed to West Africa. "Here, the most populous country in Africa, with over 200 million people, more than 500 languages, and one of the fastest-growing economies in the world." "Do you live in trees there?" asked Brittany Morrison, the blonde cheerleader in the front row. The question wasn't asked with malice, but with genuine ignorance, which somehow hurt worse. "We live in houses, Brittany. We have cities. Lagos has a population larger than New York. We have universities, hospitals, technology." "Then why'd you come here?" Tyler interrupted. "If it's so great." The question hung in the air. Nkoyo could give them the political answer, the diplomatic one. Instead, she chose truth. "Because I wanted to teach, and because, perhaps foolishly, I believed America was a place where someone like me could be valued for what I know, not judged for where I'm from." The room went quiet, but not the respectful kind. It was the quiet of students who'd already dismissed her, who'd already decided she didn't matter. The period dragged on. They ignored her lesson on cellular biology. They talked over her. They laughed when she mispronounced aluminum the British way. When the bell rang, they stampeded out like she'd been torturing them, not trying to teach them. Nkoyo sank into her chair and put her head in her hands. The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell. Parents complained about her accent. Students openly mocked her in class. Someone spray-painted "Go home" on her car. The other teachers were polite but distant, eating lunch in their separate groups, while Nkoyo sat alone. Only one person showed her kindness. Marcus, the janitor, an older black man who'd worked at Lincoln Heights for 30 years. "Don't let them break you," he said one evening, as Nkoyo stayed late grading papers. "I've seen it before. They did it to the first black teacher we had here in '95. She quit after 3 months. That's what they want, to prove they were right about you." "Maybe they are right," Nkoyo said quietly. "Maybe I don't belong here." Marcus shook his head. "That's what they want you to think. But I've been watching. You know your stuff. You care. That counts for something." "Does it?" Nkoyo gestured at the stack of incomplete homework. "The test scores that were abysmal. I am failing them." "No, baby. They're failing themselves. But keep at it. Sometimes the seeds you plant take time to grow." Nkoyo wanted to believe him. But as October turned to November, as the booing and the monkey sounds continued, as parents demanded she be fired at school board meetings, as even Principal Hendricks began avoiding eye contact with her in the hallways, she began drafting her resignation letter in her head. Then, on a cold Monday in late November, everything changed. Brittany Morrison didn't show up to class. Neither did 3 other students. By Wednesday, 7 were absent. By Friday, the school nurse's office was overflowing. Some kind of flu, Principal Hendricks announced over the PA system. Please wash your hands frequently and stay home if you're feeling ill. But Nkoyo had seen real flu. This was something else. She'd noticed it first with Tyler Jenkins. The rash on his arms that he'd tried to hide under his Letterman jacket. The way he'd been sweating profusely despite the cool classroom. When he'd asked, politely, for the first time ever, to be excused, she'd seen something in his eyes. Fear. By Monday of the following week, Lincoln Heights High School looked like a ghost town. Only half the students showed up. Those who did seemed to drag themselves through the halls, coughing, feverish, covered in spreading rashes that looked like nothing Nkoyo had seen in America. But she had seen it somewhere else. During her final year at university in Lagos, there had been an outbreak in a rural village. She'd been part of the research team sent to investigate. The disease had killed 12 people before burning itself out. They'd never identified it, never found a cure. The survivors had simply survived. Nkoyo stood in her empty classroom, staring at the notes she'd kept from that trip. She'd brought them to America with her, part of her research portfolio. The symptoms matched, the timeline matched, the rash pattern matched. But that was impossible. That disease had been isolated to one remote village in West Africa. It couldn't be here, in suburban Pennsylvania. Could it? She pulled out her phone and called the Centers for Disease Control. After being transferred 6 times, she finally reached someone who would listen. "I'm a biology teacher," she explained, knowing how it sounded. "But I have a master's in biochemistry, and I think there's an outbreak of something serious at my school." The man on the other end was polite but dismissive. "Ma'am, we've been tracking the situation. It appears to be a particularly aggressive strain of flu. Nothing to be alarmed about." "It is not flu," Nkoyo insisted. "I have seen this before, in Nigeria. The rash pattern, the fever progression, the—" "Ma'am, with all due respect, American medical facilities are quite advanced. We have the situation under control." He hung up. Nkoyo sat at her desk, her grandmother's medicine bag growing warm against her chest. Or maybe that was just her imagination. By Wednesday, Lincoln Heights High School closed. By Friday, 2 students were in the hospital. By the following Monday, 1 was dead. Brittany Morrison, the cheerleader who'd asked if Nkoyo lived in trees. 17 years old. Dead. The town spiraled into panic. Hospitals overflowed. The CDC finally sent a team, but they seemed baffled. This wasn't flu. It wasn't anything in their databases. Quarantines were established. Schools across the county closed. The governor declared a state of emergency. And still, Nkoyo couldn't stop thinking about that village in Nigeria, about the old medicine woman who'd treated the survivors with a paste made from local plants, about how Nkoyo had collected samples, had analyzed them in the university lab, had documented the compounds, but never published because the outbreak had ended and she'd moved on to other research. She pulled out those old notes now, spread them across the tiny table in her boarding house room. The medicine woman had used 3 plants, a bark, a root, and a particular leaf that grew only in the rainy season. Nkoyo had identified the active compounds, a complex mix of alkaloids and flavonoids that seemed to interrupt the disease's ability to replicate. But those plants didn't grow in America. Or did they? She spent 2 days in the Lincoln Heights Library researching, cross-referencing botanical databases. The bark came from a tree that had cousins in South America. The root was from the ginger family. Related species grew in Asian markets. The leaf was the problem. It was unique to West Africa, or so she'd thought. until she found a 1940s botanical survey that mentioned a small population of transplanted specimens in a Pennsylvania greenhouse, part of a colonial-era collection. The greenhouse had long since closed, but the record showed it had been in the next county over. Nkoyo borrowed Mrs. Chen's car and drove 3 hours to what remained of the old greenhouse. It was a ruin now, glass walls shattered, plants overgrown. But in the back, in a forgotten corner where tropical specimens had once been maintained, she found it. The plant, overgrown, half wild, but alive. She carefully collected samples, her hands shaking. This was insane. She was a high school teacher, not a medical researcher. She had no authority, no lab, no team. But she had knowledge, and she had to try. Back in her boarding house, Nkoyo converted her tiny room into a makeshift laboratory. She bought a hot plate, beakers, basic chemistry supplies from a hobby shop. She ground the plants using a mortar and pestle her mother had packed in her suitcase. She boiled, extracted, filtered, working from memory and her old notes. The smell filled the boarding house. Mrs. Chen knocked on her door. "What are you cooking?" she asked. Then she saw the setup. "Oh, you're trying to help, aren't you?" Nkoyo nodded, exhausted. "I might be wrong. Probably am wrong, but I have to try." Mrs. Chen looked at her for a long moment. "My grandson," she said quietly. "He's in the hospital. The doctors say there's nothing they can do." Her eyes filled with tears. "If you think you have something." "I have not tested it," Nkoyo said quickly. "I do not even know if it works. In Nigeria, people use this medicine for generations. But I have no controlled studies, no clinical trials." "But you believe in it?" Nkoyo touched her grandmother's medicine bag. "Yes, I believe in it." "Then let me help you." Mrs. Chen knew people. She had a nephew who worked at the hospital. She had a cousin who was a nurse. Within 24 hours, they'd managed to get Nkoyo's preparation to 3 patients on the verge of death, including Mrs. Chen's grandson. It was completely illegal. It violated every medical protocol. If it failed, Nkoyo could face criminal charges. She didn't sleep for 3 days, waiting for news. On the 4th day, Mrs. Chen burst into her room. "They're responding, all 3 of them. The fevers are breaking. The rashes are fading. The doctors can't explain it, but they're getting better." Nkoyo felt her knees go weak. She sat down hard on her bed. It worked. It actually worked. But 3 patients weren't enough. The disease was spreading faster now, jumping from Pennsylvania to neighboring states. The death toll climbed. The CDC was desperate, trying everything, failing at everything. Nkoyo knew she had to go to them, had to make them listen. She called the CDC again. This time, she didn't identify herself as a teacher. She used her old credentials from the University of Lagos, her research titles, her published papers on tropical disease vectors. They transferred her to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, head of the Outbreak Response Team. "Dr. Mitchell," Nkoyo said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I have a treatment that's working. 3 patients have responded positively. I know what this disease is. I've seen it before." There was a pause. "Who is this?" "My name is Dr. Nkoyo Okon. I am a biochemist from Nigeria. I encountered this disease 5 years ago during an outbreak in a rural village. I have been working from traditional medicine protocols that were effective in that outbreak." "Traditional medicine?" Dr. Mitchell's voice was skeptical. "Ma'am, we're dealing with a crisis here. We don't have time for alternative remedies." "With respect, doctor, your conventional medicine is failing. My remedy is working. I can send you my research, my case notes from Nigeria, and documentation of the 3 recent cases. Please, just look at it. Another pause, longer this time. Send everything to this email, Dr. Mitchell said finally. I can't promise anything, but I'll review it. Nkoyo sent everything she had. Then she waited. 12 hours later, her phone rang. It was Dr. Mitchell. We need you in Atlanta. Now. The CDC wants to talk to you. The flight to Atlanta was surreal. Nkoyo had never been on a plane in America before. She clutched her grandmother's medicine bag the entire time, whispering prayers in Efik, her native language. At CDC headquarters, she was ushered into a conference room full of doctors, scientists, and government officials. They looked at her with a mixture of desperation and suspicion. Dr. Okon, Dr. Mitchell began, we've reviewed your documentation. We've also independently verified the 3 cases you treated in Pennsylvania. The recovery rate is unprecedented. We'd like you to work with us to reproduce your treatment on a larger scale. One of the government officials cleared his throat. However, we need to be clear. If this treatment doesn't work broadly, or if there are complications, I understand the risks, Nkoyo interrupted. But people are dying. We must try. Over the next week, Nkoyo worked alongside the CDC's top researchers. They were skeptical at first. This African woman, with her traditional medicine and her makeshift preparations. But as they analyzed her compounds, as they saw the mechanisms by which the plant alkaloids disrupted the disease's replication, skepticism turned to respect. This is brilliant, Dr. Mitchell. Mitchell said, studying Nkoyo's extraction process, the compound combinations create a synergistic effect. We'd never have found this using conventional screening methods. In Africa, we have been using plants as medicine for thousands of years, Nkoyo said quietly. Not because we are primitive, but because we are practical. We work with what nature provides. The treatment was scaled up, produced in CDC labs, distributed to hospitals. Within days, mortality rates began to drop. Within 2 weeks, the outbreak was under control. Within a month, it was over. The disease that had killed 847 people and infected over 50,000 was stopped. By a high school biology teacher from Nigeria. The media descended down. Nkoyo gave interviews from the CDC, explaining the science, crediting the traditional healers of her homeland, trying to bridge the gap between African knowledge and American medicine. But it was one interview with a local Pennsylvania news station that she'd insisted on doing in person. Nkoyo stood in front of Lincoln Heights High School for the first time in 3 weeks. The building looked the same. Same peeling paint, same brown patches on the football field. But everything had changed. Principal Hendricks met her at the entrance, and this time he looked at her with something she'd never seen before. Admiration. Dr. Okon, he said, pronouncing her name correctly now. Welcome back, the students, everyone. We'd like to hold an assembly, to thank you. That is not necessary, Nkoyo said softly. I just want to return to teaching. You saved lives here. Tyler Jenkins, Marcus Thompson, dozens of others. Their parents, well, let's just say there's been a lot of soul-searching in this community. The assembly was scheduled for that afternoon. Nkoyo spent the morning in her classroom, straightening the desks that had sat empty for weeks, preparing a lesson on plant biochemistry that suddenly felt more relevant than ever. When she walked into the gymnasium at 2 p.m., the entire school was there. Students, teachers, staff, parents, even some of the school board members who'd wanted her fired. The room fell silent as she made her way to the podium. Principal Hendricks introduced her, his voice cracking with emotion as he recounted how the outbreak had touched almost every family in the community. When he finished, the applause started slowly, then built into a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Nkoyo stood at the podium, overwhelmed. These were the same people who had booed her, mocked her, called her a monkey. Now they stood and clapped until their hands were red. When the applause finally died down, Nkoyo spoke. "Thank you," she said simply. "But I did not do this alone. I stood on the shoulders of African healers who have been practicing medicine for generations. I used knowledge passed down through centuries, from grandmother to granddaughter, in villages that many of you could not find on a map." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. She found Tyler Jenkins sitting with his football team. Found Brittany Morrison's parents, tears streaming down their faces. Found Mrs. Whitmore from Magnolia Drive, sitting in the back, unable to meet her eyes. "When I came to America," Nkoyo continued, "I believed I was coming to teach, but I have learned that teaching goes both ways. You taught me about resilience, about perseverance, about the cost of prejudice and the power of redemption." She touched her grandmother's medicine bag through her blouse. "In my culture, we say Ibon foro idiong bufo Ibon, which means one tree cannot make a forest. We need each other. African wisdom saved American lives. But American technology helped me scale that wisdom, helped me reach people I could never have helped alone. That is the true lesson here." She looked directly at the students now, her students. When you see someone different from you, someone who speaks differently, looks differently, comes from a place you do not understand, do not assume they have nothing to teach you. Do not assume they are less than you, because the person you mock today might be the person who saves your life tomorrow. The silence in the gymnasium was absolute. Then Tyler Jenkins stood up, the star quarterback, the one who'd made monkey noises on her first day, walked down the aisle toward her. Nkoyo tensed, unsure what was happening. He climbed the steps to the podium. His eyes were red. "Miss Okon, Dr. Okon," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I treated you like dirt. I made fun of you. I got everyone else to do it too." His voice broke. "And then you saved my life. You saved me even after everything I did to you." Tears ran down his face now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway, and I'm promising you, and everyone here, that I'll never judge someone by where they're from again. I'll never assume I'm better than someone just because they're different." He extended his hand. Nkoyo looked at it for a long moment, thinking about all the pain, all the humiliation, all the time she'd cried alone in her boarding house room. Then she took his hand and shook it. "We all make mistakes, Tyler," she said. "What matters is what we learn from them." The gymnasium erupted in applause again. But this time, it felt different. It felt real. After the assembly, as Nkoyo walked back to her classroom, she was stopped by Mrs. Patricia Whitmore, the woman who'd slammed the door in her face, who'd called her a monkey, who'd told her to go back to her tree. "Dr. is Okon," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I speak with you?" Nkoyo nodded, bracing herself. "I need to apologize," Mrs. Whitmore said. "No, I need to do more than apologize. I need to confess. I was hateful to you. Cruel. I judged you based on nothing but the color of your skin and my own ignorant prejudices." Tears welled in her eyes. My daughter was sick. Emily. She's 12. The doctor said she might not make it. Your medicine saved her. P. She reached out, then stopped, as if afraid to touch Nkoyo. You saved my daughter's life, after I treated you worse than an animal. I don't know how to live with that. I don't know how to make it right. Nkoyo studied the woman's face, seeing genuine anguish there. She thought about her mother's words before she left Nigeria. You will face hardship in America. People will be cruel. But remember, Nkoyo, hurt people, and healed people heal people. Choose which you want to be. Nkoyo said finally, by treating the next person who is different from you with the respect they deserve from the start. By teaching your daughter to see people for who they are, not what they look like. By using your voice in this community to stand up for others who face what you put me through. Mrs. Whitmore nodded vigorously. Yes, yes I will. I swear I will. She paused. And the apartment on Magnolia Drive. It's yours if you want it. No rent for the first 3 months. It's the least I can do. Nkoyo smiled, a genuine smile. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. But I am happy where I am. Mrs. Chen has been kind to me when no one else was. I will not forget that. The weeks after the assembly brought changes Nkoyo had never anticipated. Her classroom, once half empty with disengaged students, was now packed. Students actually did their homework. They asked questions. They wanted to learn, not just about biology, but about Nigeria, about African science and medicine, about the world beyond their small Pennsylvania town. Dr. Okon, one student asked during a lesson on ethnobotany, why don't we learn about African contributions to science in our textbooks? It was a good question. Nkoyo thought about how to answer. Because for a long time, she said carefully, the people who wrote the textbooks did not think African knowledge was valuable. They saw traditional medicine as primitive superstition, not as sophisticated science developed over millennia. But that is changing. You are part of that change. She started a new program, Partnership with Progress. She connected Lincoln Heights High School with her old university in Lagos, setting up video exchanges where American students learned from Nigerian students and vice versa. They shared lessons on biology, culture, history, and medicine. The students who once mocked her accent now struggled to learn basic phrases in Efik and Yoruba. Tyler Jenkins became one of her most dedicated students. He changed his major plans from business to pre-med, wanting to study tropical diseases. Because of you, he told her, you showed me there's a whole world of science we don't even know about. The story spread beyond Lincoln Heights, beyond Pennsylvania. Nkoyo was invited to speak at universities, at medical conferences, at the United Nations. She became the face of a movement to integrate traditional medicine with modern science, to respect indigenous knowledge systems, to build bridges between cultures. But she never stopped teaching at Lincoln Heights High School. This is where I'm needed, she told Dr. Mitchell when the CDC offered her a full-time research position. These students, this community, they gave me the hardest lessons of my life. Now I get to give them something back. The following September, on the first day of school, Nkoyo stood outside room 214, watching new students file in. Among them was a young girl wearing a hijab, looking nervous and out of place. Nkoyo recognized that look. She'd worn it herself just a year ago. Some of the other students whispered, pointed. The girl's shoulders hunched, trying to make herself small. Nkoyo was about to intervene when Tyler Jenkins walked over to the girl. Hey, he said, his voice friendly. You're new, right? I'm Tyler. This is the best biology class in the school. Dr. Okon is amazing. Come on, I'll show you where to sit." The girl's face lit up with relief. As they walked into the classroom together, chatting, Nkoyo felt something in her chest loosen. Maybe this was the real cure, not the medicine she'd created, but the change she'd sparked in hearts and minds. Marcus, the janitor, came up beside her, watching the scene with a knowing smile. "Told you," he said. "Seeds take time to grow." Nkoyo smiled back. "Yes, they do." 2 years later, Nkoyo stood in the White House Rose Garden, accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The president spoke about her courage, her brilliance, her contribution to saving thousands of lives during the outbreak. But Nkoyo's mind was elsewhere, remembering. She remembered that first day at Lincoln Heights, the monkey sounds, the paper airplanes. She remembered Mrs. Whitmore's hate. She remembered crying alone in Mrs. Chen's boarding house, drafting resignation letters in her head. She remembered the choice she'd made to stay, to persevere, to believe that she had value, even when everyone around her said she didn't. After the ceremony, she flew back to Pennsylvania, not to a hotel or to some fancy apartment, but to Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where she still kept her room, even though she could now afford much more. "Why do you stay here, Mrs. Chen?" asked her that evening, serving tea in the small kitchen where Nkoyo had once set up her makeshift laboratory. "Because this is where I found my power," Nkoyo said simply. "Not in the CDC labs, not in the White House. Here, in this tiny room where I had nothing but my knowledge, my heritage, and my determination. I never want to forget what that felt like." Her phone rang. It was her mother, calling from Nigeria. Nkoyo switched to Efik, the conversation flowing in her native tongue. "Nene, I'm so proud of you," her mother said, crying happy tears. "Your grandmother would be so proud. You carried her medicine to the world." "I carried all of us, Mama," Nkoyo replied. "Every ancestor who gathered plants, who mixed preparations, who healed the sick. They saved those lives, not me. I was just the bridge." After hanging up, Nkoyo walked to Lincoln Heights High School. It was evening. The building empty, except for the lights in the science wing. She'd had it renovated, using her medal award money. Now it housed a state-of-the-art biochemistry lab, where students learned not just from textbooks, but from real research, real experimentation. She stood in her classroom, looking at the photos on the wall. Pictures of her students conducting experiments. Pictures from the Lagos exchange program. A photo of that first class, the one that had booed her. They'd all signed it last year, with apologies and thank yous. And in the center, a framed newspaper clipping. "Local teacher saves thousands with African remedy." A knock on the door. Tyler Jenkins stood there, now a sophomore at Johns Hopkins, home for winter break. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, walking in. "Wanted to tell you, I got accepted into the Tropical Medicine Research Program. I'm going to Nigeria next summer." Nkoyo beamed. "They will love you there. Just remember, go with an open mind and an open heart. Listen more than I speak. Respect the knowledge I find there." He grinned. "You've only told me 1,000 times. Then maybe you are finally listening." They laughed together. As Tyler left, he paused at the door. "Dr. Okon, thank you. For not giving up on us. For not going home when we gave you every reason to. For showing us that ignorance is a choice, and so is wisdom." After he left, Nkoyo sat at her desk, touched her grandmother's medicine bag, and whispered a prayer of gratitude. She'd come to America to teach. She'd been mocked, rejected, dismissed as primitive and ignorant. They'd called her a monkey, told her to go back to her tree. But she'd stayed. She'd persevered. And in the process, she'd proven that knowledge has no color, that wisdom flows from every culture, that the person you underestimate today might be the person who saves your tomorrow. The cure she'd discovered wasn't just for a disease. It was a cure for prejudice, for ignorance, for the sickness of hate that had plagued this community. And like all good medicine, it worked slowly, changing things from the inside out. Nkoyo smiled, thinking about the girl in the hijab who was now thriving in her class, about the exchange students learning from each other across continents, about a community that had been transformed, not by force, but by truth. She pulled out her lesson plan for Monday. They'd be starting a new unit, the intersection of traditional and modern medicine. Her students would learn about Chinese herbal remedies, about Ayurvedic practices from India, about Aboriginal Australian medicine, about the brilliant indigenous scientists whose work had been overlooked for centuries. Because if Nkoyo's story taught anything, it was this: every culture has gifts to offer. Every person has value, and the greatest discoveries often come from the most unexpected places. From a small village in Nigeria. From a grandmother's medicine bag. From a teacher they called a monkey. The world is full of Nkoyos, brilliant people dismissed because they don't look right, sound right, or come from the right place. How many cures have we lost because we refused to listen? How many solutions have slipped through our fingers because we were too proud to learn from those we considered beneath us? Nkoyo's story reminds us that knowledge has no borders, that genius wears every shade of skin, and that sometimes the person you underestimate might be the one who saves your life. Who are you underestimating? Who have you dismissed without truly knowing them? The Nkoyo in your life might be your coworker, your neighbor, the immigrant you pass on the street. Don't wait until you need saving to recognize their worth. Learn their stories. Respect their knowledge. Bridge the gaps that divide us. Because in the end, we all need each other. One tree cannot make a forest, but together we can create something magnificent. Share this story if it moved you. Tag someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, be the person who welcomes the next Nkoyo, rather than the one who slams the door in her face. The cure for hate is respect. The cure for ignorance is curiosity. The cure for division is connection. What cure will you choose?